All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound Radio Show, your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. I'm your host, Robert Winfrey. All right, tonight we will be reviewing UFC Fight Night 129. Oi. Yeah, that event, we'll talk about it.
Card sucked.
This is an interesting event because
It sucked.
partially, yes, but it's weird that this is a very obvious example of how the whole is not the sum of its parts. But we'll get into the specifics of that. We will also preview UFC Fight Night 130, which comes your way next Sunday morning, special start time. I believe the first prelim kicks off at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I will double check that. But Sunday morning, and is the UFC's debut in Liverpool. The main event is between Stephen Thompson and Darren Till, and we will, of course, preview the main card. For the second half of our show, we will also go over major news portions of the day, fight announcements, all that good stuff pertaining to the world of combat sports, specifically MMA, but I actually do have a couple of boxing questions for Pat because he's back this week after missing last week, but, I had a friend's wedding, if memory serves, but since I've already mentioned I have the full panel, let's go ahead and bring them on. First up, 411 Mania's resident jack of all trades and my regular partner in crime, Jeff Harris, is back with us again. Jeff, how are you this evening?
Better than Custer, thank you, Robert.
And holding things down for us on the East Coast, we have Pat Mullen, the pugilistic pontiff, back here with us. Pat, how are you this evening?
Jeff reminds me of a story I once heard when General Custer's wife basically found out the news of her husband's death. She was given a wish by an angel, and the angel said to her, "Mrs. Custer, what would you like? Anything, you name it." Mrs. Custer said, "I'd like you to show me my husband's last thoughts." So the angel gets out an easel, a canvas, and some paints, and he starts painting and painting and painting. And there's this picture, and the wife looks upset and looks at the angel. The angel's confused. She says, "Mrs. Custer, why are you upset?" She goes, "I ask you to show me my husband's last thoughts, and you show me this? Cows with halos above their heads and Native Americans making love? What is this?" And he says, "Mrs. Custer, these are your husband's final thoughts. Holy cow, look at all these effing Indians."
Yep. I think you've told that joke here on this show before. We've been doing this for enough years.
Well, Jeff put a Custer reference out there. It doesn't happen much, so I got to take it when I can get it.
That's fair. Okay, before we jump into Fight Night 129, and because I'm trying to put off elements of this as long as possible, Pat, you weren't here last week. We talked very briefly towards the end of the show last week about Vasily Lomachenko becoming the fastest man in boxing history to win world titles in 3 different weight classes, and a bit of his fight with Jorge Linares. So I just wanted to give you, being the boxing enthusiast and Lomachenko fan that you are, 50 words or less to talk about anything pertaining to that fight or Lomachenko's accomplishment that you wanted to bring up.
Special fighter, literally one moment of complacency in that fight. Found out what happens when you give that moment to a bigger, stronger guy with good technique, and he got knocked down. But very simply adjusted, held tight for the rest of the round, took the fight back to Linares, and beat him up and made him quit, just like he does everybody else. We're starting to see that the weight and the size start to matter in Lomachenko's fights more, but he's still that special breed of fighter where until he gets to maybe 140 pounds, this isn't really going to be an issue for him against generally anybody.
Well, you do need to, and again, to be fair, Jorge Linares did not have the success he had against him based purely on his size. Linares is a darn good fighter in his own right.
He is. It was one lapse in judgment where Lomachenko stopped using angles to come in and just came straight in and ran right into a right hand from Linares, which is Linares' best punch. Got put on the seat of his pants. Was a little bit hazy, but, stayed composed, shook it off, didn't try to engage or do anything stupid, and made it through the round and came back strong.
All right. I got a serious kick out of them having Oscar De La Hoya ringside for that to watch Lomachenko shatter his record. Because
Always fun.
He did it, what, a full, 10, 12 fights faster than De La Hoya did it?
He did it 11 fights faster than Oscar did.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, with that out of the way, moving on to UFC Fight Night 129. The UFC's debut in the country of Chile on the western coast of South America. Oh, man. This event... The UFC needs to seriously reconsider how long their events go, because if you trim about half of this event, you get a solid fight night. But they don't. They haven't reconsidered that.
I think we need to go back to 10 fights at most.
Something like that, but this was not helped by the main event. For the record, this particular event, start to finish, was 6.5 hours. It started at 4:30 my time, wrapped up around 11-ish. Yeah, long event. In your main event, Kamaru Usman defeats Damian Maia via unanimous decision, 50-45, 49-46, and 49-46. I believe I was 49-45. I actually gave Usman a 10-8 in the fourth round because they were operating under the new rules, and the scoring criteria for 10-8s is slightly... It's better, in my opinion. It's less about nearly finishing a guy and more about the margin of victory for the round. And I thought in the 8th, borderline, but I thought he earned it. This was a horribly drawn-out fight. This was... Let me put it like this. If I told you that on 3 weeks' notice, Damian Maia was fighting another strong wrestler in the vein of Tyron Woodley, you would expect the fight to go similar to the Tyron Woodley fight, with the minor exception that Usman's striking is neither as powerful nor as refined as Tyron's, and Tyron's striking isn't exactly blowing the doors off of anybody from a technical standpoint. He hits like a truck, but he's not the most technical striker. This went about like that. Just not a whole lot going on. I want to give credit to a couple of things on the positive side before I let everyone else get into the negatives, because I could be negative about this fight all day long. Two things that I... excuse me. Still getting over that cold from last week. That I wanted to bring up. One is the timing on Maia's takedowns in this fight was better than it's been in his last, 3 or 4. He was able to time those attempts very, very well relative to what Kamaru Usman was doing. Kamaru Usman just has incredibly strong hips. And when Maia would get... A lot of the takedown attempts that Maia had on him would have worked against, pretty much everyone else in the division. Certainly, they were really well timed. There were really good efforts behind them. He actually had some drive to his takedowns, especially early. But Kamaru Usman had a really good defense planned out, and he has, again, really, really strong hips that are hard to control. Usman has... he said in this post-fight interview that he broke his right hand in the second round and then broke his left hand in the third. If true... I can't blame him at this point for not getting a finish, largely because he's not a great finisher anyway. And you're not going to submit Damian Maia, because, yeah, right. And if you have broken both of your hands, you're not going to knock him out. And Kamaru Usman, again, not a prolific finisher anyway. I do want to... I want to say this about both these guys, because this needs to be... They need to get credit for this as well. Damian Maia took this fight on 3 weeks' notice. And that's nothing to sneeze at. Kamaru Usman also took this fight on 3 weeks' notice. He was always on this card. God, sorry. But he went from preparing for Santiago Ponzinibbio to Damian Maia. Santiago Ponzinibbio and Damian Maia, from a fighting perspective, have essentially nothing in common. So I just really do want to give both of these guys credit for keeping a relevant main event on this card, to Maia for giving a young, up-and-coming, very scary fight that, I mean, nobody wants to fight Kamaru Usman, but giving him that shot on short notice and preserving this card, and they do deserve credit for that. I do want to make sure they got that. This fight was still terrible. I never want to watch Damian Maia fight a strong wrestler ever again. I don't blame anyone who says they never want to see Damian Maia fight again at this point. This was, again, absent a few minor technical things that you could talk about, this was a terrible, terrible fight. And it drug on, it just never ended, and it was the worst possible capstone to this event from an entertainment perspective, but entirely appropriate given how the card had gone. So that's my 2 cents on this. I don't know who Usman fights next, but you need to keep him fighting a relatively high level of competition. He kind of struggled in some respects with this fight, but you can't have him go back to fighting the unranked, Emil Meber Mex of the world, because he has to be challenged if he's going to get better, and there's still a lot of upside to Usman. This was just a terrible fight. And Damian Maia is, 40. And he's been fighting forever. He's just past his prime. Jeff, I'll start with you, because I gave Pat first crack at, some boxing-related stuff. What did you think about this fight?
The fight was... The fight was not good. Kamaru Usman was dominant, so there was that, I suppose. He's the young and surging contender, so he has that going for him. Damian Maia, he's 40 years old, and he looked every bit of it last night, perhaps even older. I didn't care for his performance at all. I know Usman... apparently he broke both of his hands during the fight, but even still, I felt like there were moments where he could have done more and possibly finished Maia, but didn't. Granted, even Usman's not much of a finisher throughout his UFC career. He has only 2 finishes in the UFC to his record. Granted, he's undefeated, but this does sort of... I'd say really put him in the top 5 right now. I don't even know if Maia should be ranked in the top 10 after that performance. Maybe he'll be at the bottom of the top 10. As for who you match him up with, the good thing is we have lots of options for Usman. You could rebook the fight with Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio is very much deserving of a big fight next. You could put him in there with the loser of Dos Anjos versus Covington off the strength of this win with Maia. Or you could put... I also like the idea of him possibly challenging the loser of next week's fight in Liverpool, because I think either one of those guys needs to be tested against a high-level wrestler. See how they'll do there. And
Till specifically is one that I think we've all kind of mentioned would be a great test for both guys.
Right. Welterweight is pretty stacked on rising contenders right now, on guys who could be fighting for the belt in the future. You have guys like Thompson and Darren Till. Granted, Darren Till, he's the more exciting prospect right now. You have Rafael Dos Anjos, who's fighting Covington for the fake belt, and then you have Usman. So you have some young blood. The good thing is that at welterweight, there's some young, exciting talent coming up right now. There's a mix of some tough veterans in there, so you have a good mix of everything, which is more than I can say for light heavyweight at the moment. So there you go.
We'll get to that in a minute or two here. Pat, what do you got on this one? I mean, you've been critical of Damian Maia for a while in many respects. What do you think about Usman going forward after this?
I like Usman. We talked, all three of us on this show have been very positive about what he's brought to the table, and we wanted to see him get an opportunity at a top 10 fight, and he got it here, and he absolutely made the most of it. And I'm sure we all like him going forward in terms of want to seeing more of him against, an elite level of competition. This fight, more than anything, brought me back to Woodley Maia, and not in a good way. During that fight, maybe the most interesting exchange that happened was on commentary between Dominic Cruz and Joe Rogan, when Joe Rogan was really harping that Maia is so good at jiu-jitsu that he can just rely on jiu-jitsu and not have to learn anything else and still be possibly the champion of the division. When Dominic Cruz vehemently objected to it and said, absolutely not. You can no longer be a one-dimensional fighter without having at least some capabilities in every aspect to succeed as a champion. And I think if you want to see a real illustration of that point in place besides the Woodley fight, this fight is a very good indicator of that. Because again, Maia, who really doesn't do anything well other than jiu-jitsu, and he's got great jiu-jitsu, but he does not have good technique standing in any form. His wrestling is not very good. And even though he showed better capability for takedowns in this fight by having to use standard double leg takedowns and things of that nature, he had a guy with very good balance, very explosive hip movements, and a guy who knows how to deal with being taken down when it does happen. So more than anything, if you want to see a fight illustrate the point that you cannot be one-dimensional and really be the top guy, this is it. Okay, Maia has never adapted his game, and that's why the better guys have always been able to beat him. And when he has won, it's usually because the other guy makes a mistake or there's some suspect judging involved.
Last thing I want to say about this before we move on. Random stat pertaining to Damian Maia. Damian Maia is 0 for 49 in takedowns over his last 3 fights. Let that marinate for just a minute. His last 3 fights, 2 of which have gone the full 25 minutes, the other one went the full 15. He has attempted 49 takedowns and succeeded on 0. Now he
really sucks against wrestlers.
Yes, he does.
Strong wrestlers, yes. And he's fought 3 strong wrestlers in a row. That is a terrible matchup for him. All right,
I guess the only exception was probably Neil Magny, but how is Magny?
Neil Magny's not strong. Neil Magny is not a strong wrestler.
And John Fitch, he did do but that fight was 5 years ago. So.
Fitch would be the only one I would think qualifies for that.
Even if you brought up the Weidman fight, you're talking about a Weidman who accepted that fight on super short notice and cut a ton of weight and barely had anything left and still had enough to really beat Maia.
I mean, Mark Munoz beat him.
Shields, he had a really bad performance against him.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, speaking of wrestling, in your co-main event, Tatiana Suarez defeated Alexa Grasso via submission in the first round. This went basically as expected. Look, I've kind of talked up Grasso's game in some respects here. I didn't pick her to win this. I didn't like her chances. Not only did I not think she would win, I didn't like her chances to win at all. There's still some good elements to her game, but there's a significant amount of work to do, and if you happen to still be on her hype train, get off at the next stop. As soon as Suarez pushed this into the clinch up against the fence, she was able to continually go for takedowns. Got a couple of them. Grasso kept popping back up, but she kept losing position each time. Suarez got the back, got the choke. Grasso's defense of this was terrible. She was fighting the elbow of Suarez initially rather than actually fighting the hands, which is a last-ditch stopgap measure more than a significantly not significant, more than a sustainable defense. And then when that failed, she just tried punching to get out of it, which never works. That never works. You may as well throw elbows to the body. Because, I mean, it's just as effective, and at least then you could claim that you were brainwashed by crappy movies where I'm being choked, but I'll elbow the body and this will save me. It never works. Suarez remains undefeated. Suarez keeps on rolling. I mean, there's a lot of upside to Suarez, but at the moment she is entirely dependent on her wrestling and top control. If she doesn't have that, she doesn't have anything. Her striking is terrible. Her bottom game is not good. She has to be the one in control of that. And to be fair, again, she's very young in the sport. There's plenty of time to develop that, but that is absolutely stuff she has to work on going forward.
Have her fight Mackenzie Dern.
Different weight classes.
I like the principle involved, though, Jeff.
I would agree with that, actually. The principle there is quite good. Pat, I'll stick with you for this one, then. Thoughts on this fight in general and, maybe Suarez kind of going forward?
So you guys know I like to do a fair bit of gambling when it comes to these things. If I see a nice little payout and I like the odds on this one, I'll go with it. There were certain lines where Alexa Grasso going into this fight was as much as a plus 700 underdog. And again, for those who don't understand how gambling works, plus 700 means if I were to bet $100 and she won, I would receive $700. However, I did not like her odds in the least because she's never shown the ability to deal with someone in the style of Tatiana Suarez. What last night was indicative of is that she has no idea about technical fundamentals of jiu-jitsu. She has no idea how to defend in the clinch, especially when looking for someone to take her down in the clinch. And she is not ready for prime time. She needs to go to Invicta or Bellator because she's going to continue to be eaten up and spit out and not able to develop the skills that she potentially can because she's going to constantly be getting beaten. And Tatiana Suarez, good grappler when on top and being the aggressor, not much else to her game. So the fact that this was so quick, so one-sided, and the odds makers knew it, is very indicative of just how not ready Alexa Grasso is, and that she should not be in the UFC.
All right, Jeff, your thoughts on this one?
I thought it was a good showcase fight for Tatiana Suarez. I don't know if I would go so far as, it's time to get rid of Alexa Grasso, but I thought Suarez looked good. She's clear. I mean, she's a wrestler who competed at a very high level internationally. She almost could have made it in. She almost, I think, made it into the Olympics, right, Robert?
Yeah, there was. She was very close to that. Then she suffered a neck injury, and that actually wound up revealing thyroid cancer.
She definitely has things she can work on and things she can get better in. And she's still fairly young in her MMA career. This was only her sixth actual professional fight, not counting the fights from the Ultimate Fighter. So I still think she's a decent prospect to look at going forward, and I think she has things she can work on. But I think she beat a decent veteran here, and I want to see what she's going to do next. I'm not. Some fighters, with just a decent wrestling game and a decent top game, have gone very far in their careers. So
and it doesn't hurt that women's strawweight is the best women's division, but still very much a work in progress.
Right. So I'm not saying she's going to be champion or fighting for the title, but it can definitely help her going forward in her career. And I think there are quite a few women in the top 10 she probably matches up well against.
Yeah.
Just based on her wrestling and grappling skills alone.
All right, next up we had one of the fights I mentioned I was potentially looking forward to on this card because there's a grand total of one prospect at light heavyweight. One. Singular. There is one guy. His name is Dominic Reyes. And he fought on this card, and he knocked out Jared Cannonier 2 minutes and 55 seconds into the first round. So we can all still be a little bit excited about Dominic Reyes going forward until he fights a really strong wrestler, but I'm not entirely sure there are all that many of them left at light heavyweight in the UFC. I kind of dig that. I kind of like Reyes. There's very clearly some things he still has to work on, but the finishing sequence here was actually really nice. He kind of shoulder rolled and then landed a step back left uppercut, which is a really underutilized technique in MMA in general, just the retreating uppercut. Wobbled Cannonier, he followed up with some kicks, landed a front kick to the body that doubled Cannonier over, and then he landed the left uppercut again to drop him and prompt the stoppage. Maybe a tad premature, but nothing that should have been complained about, all things considered. Reyes is, again, the lone, beacon of hope for, the next 2 to 3 years in that division. It's this guy. And knowing this division, the wheels will fall off of him in the next, 18 months just because we can't have nice things at light heavyweight, but...
Look at Serkunov.
Yeah. Look at what happened to Uzdemir when he got into the title scene. It's just not a good division. Jeff, I'll go ahead and stick with you for this one because you've mentioned we all here know what a wasteland light heavyweight is. What did you think about the fight here? What did you think about the Devastator? Because he can't be the Dominator. Dominic Reyes.
Reyes, he looked okay. I'm glad he won because we desperately need some young up and comers at light heavyweight now. I don't know if Reyes is that guy yet, but at least he looked good last night, and that's about all I have.
He's the closest thing we have. Pat,
at the moment.
At the moment, Pat, I have a couple of slightly more specific questions. I know you mentioned before that you kind of like watching Jared Cannonier fight because he's crazy, and I mean that in a good way. But the finishing sequence here from Reyes, that nice little shoulder roll to uppercut, that's a really kind of like boxing, not fundamental technique, but one of those things that if you are a boxer of any repute, you know that basic sequence. So what do you see in Reyes going forward here? And I hate to overly hype the guy, but we have to fill the airtime somehow.
He does things athletically that he can get away with now, and he's a good enough athlete that he's fighting guys who aren't capable of keeping up with him to take advantage of the mistakes. He did utilize the shoulder roll uppercut combination. However, he didn't really do it properly. His chin wasn't in good positioning. When he came back with the uppercut, his defense was wide open, so a smarter fighter would be able to take advantage of it. However, if he can supplement that athleticism, which you cannot teach, you are born with, if he can supplement that with solid fundamental teaching, he's going to be very, very dangerous going forward. And he's only had, this is his 8th or 9th fight? There's a lot of time.
I believe 8.
Yeah, there's a lot of time for... Either way. Either way. There's a lot of time and a lot of things you can do to develop him further. Match him up with guys who will test him in certain respects. Let him develop those skills in the gym. And he could potentially be the next very good light heavyweight that we have. And we are sorely in need of that. Because the top of the division right now, not only are they, in kind of a holding pattern, Cormier doesn't look likely to fight for very much longer. The same seems to be the pattern with Alexander Gustafsson. If we're counting Rumble Johnson, he's already retired once.
We're not.
So there's really not a lot going on in this division to be excited about or to be positive about. This is one of those things we can be as long as the development stays in place. If it doesn't, then we're going to derail him before he gets going.
Yeah. All right, next up, the fight that destroyed the crowd and kind of... This fight kind of actually signaled the end of this card. Not just for the live crowd, but it all went downhill after this. And again, we had 2 quick finishes after this, but I don't know, man. This was the point. This fight was when things started dragging from a broadcast perspective, from a fight perspective. Guido Canetti defeated Diego Rivas via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the board. The reason this deflated the crowd was Rivas was the only Chilean fighter on this card. He was, I believe, the first Chilean member of the UFC. I could be wrong about that, but... And he got beat in a lackluster fight. I mean, Rivas didn't really seem to kind of get going until the 3rd round. For the first 2 rounds, Canetti just kind of outworked him a little bit, out-grappled him a little bit. I mean, this was a relatively uninspired performance from all parties. And the hometown guy lost. So in addition to this, again, dragging as a fight, it killed the energy of the crowd. This was only on the main card because Rivas is, Chilean. If we're going on merit, this should have been on the prelims. This and the Pantoja Moreno fight should have swapped places, but what are you going to do? Just a really uninspired, kind of mediocre level bantamweight fight from both guys. I don't really have a whole lot to say here. Jeff, I suppose I'll start with you this time. Am I being too hard on this?
Worst fight of the year candidate. Talk about cab drivers. Neither of these guys could get a job at Uber. Neither of these guys are UFC caliber. This fight was awful. It deserves to die and burn in hell. May it not rest in peace.
Pat, are Jeff and I being too hard on this? Or do you have anything else that you maybe saw in this that wasn't completely terrible, or do you want to just keep piling onto this thing?
No, this was ugly from start to finish in almost every respect. It's just a shame too, because there were opportunities where there were chances this fight could have got going, and then neither guy decided to take advantage of it, and they both just backed off and got complacent and just didn't want to fight at times. It was really, they should both be embarrassed, honestly, of this effort, and if the UFC never signs another Chilean fighter, this is why.
Yeah, take that, Rivas. You have ruined it for your country. All right, next up. One of the other fights on this card I was kind of looking forward to. Andrea Lee defeated Veronica Macedo via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the board. I was looking forward to this specifically because I have seen a lot of Andrea Lee's fights. I believe I've seen all of her Invicta fights. I covered a couple of them because they were on cards that I happened to covered.
She's a former Invicta champion.
No?
Or no, wait.
No.
Legacy champ. Yeah. Legacy flyweight champion. I'm sorry.
She was the Legacy FC flyweight champion. Then she was the Legacy Fighting Alliance women's flyweight champion. Her only loss is she lost a very hotly contested split decision to Roxanne Modafferi in her 3rd fight. And then she got choked out by Sarah DeLelio in March of 16. And she's won all of her fights since. That includes 2 Invicta fights. Again, the Legacy, the LFA women's flyweight title. She's someone to keep an eye on going forward in this division. She's got really strong kickboxing. Again, I think she won her debut professional fight by literally kicking someone's finger off. Because you don't block with open hands when someone's kicking, guys. Your fingers will break. As she's worked on, rounding out her game. She's young. And women's flyweight is in desperate need of talented bodies. And I like the way she was able to change distances in this fight, if kind of punching forward, but as soon as Macedo tried to get anything going, they were stuck in the clinch where Lee was clearly superior, both with her knees to the body, which were pretty nasty, and then her general wrestling was better. Although that stupid head and arm throw, I hate it so much.
Why does anyone still try that?
I don't know. I genuinely do not know. I cannot express what unless you are, and bear in mind, unless you are legitimately a near international quality judoka, don't do it. It is just bad. If you're someone like, again, a Ronda, a Caro Parisian, for whatever this is worth, even though his MMA career kind of fizzled, a Satoshi Ishii, if you're one of these guys who really knows judo, you might be able to get away with it. If you're not, please stop. It's not good. Anyone who knows what they're doing is probably going to be able to counter you off of it, and you'll wind up in a worse position. Get a full body lock, or, bend at the waist and actually shoot a double. There's a severe lack of actual wrestling in women's MMA, and it's really troubling. But, again, hopefully that kind of... there were a lot of stupid things. Male fighters used to do this too back in the early days, so they eventually learned. So hopefully women's MMA will learn as well. But this was a solid, solid fight, all things considered. Nothing spectacular, but a good debut for Lee. And again, one of the better fights if you were to look at the totality of fight on the entire main card. Pat, I want to stick with you for this one. I believe this is your first exposure to Andrea Lee, if nothing else. So, what were your thoughts on this one?
The big thing that jumped out at me when I watched this was the tail of the tape. Even though she was only 2 inches taller, she had a 5.5-inch reach advantage, which is significant, and she actually used it, which I was really shocked at. She controlled distance really well in this fight for the majority of it. Kept striking range at her preferred range. When it did get too close, clinched, used her height, used her leverage to control in the clinch. She didn't do anything that's going to blow anybody away, but she made smart, economical decisions through the majority of this, other than the stupid head-arm throw moment. So I liked what I saw. You can wow somebody with a spectacular knockout with poor technique. It's more impressive to show a controlled, smart, balanced fighting plan to me than it is to do that. And she did that. And I know she wasn't fighting a world beater of competition here, but she did a lot of things that would make you not hesitant to pick her against a lot of other women in that division.
All right, Jeff, your thoughts on the fight?
Decent performance for Andrea Lee. Didn't blow me away.
All right, and kicking off the main card, Vicente Luque knocked out Chad Laprise with a really well-timed and well-executed just short left hook as Laprise was coming in. Caught him right on the chin, and...
Laprise sucks.
Laprise doesn't suck.
He's just a dummy.
He's made some bad decisions, but... you know what? No, go ahead. Please elaborate on that for me. We don't have to stick to the same format with all of these fights. That's boring and repetitive. Go ahead on this fight, then.
So this is another fight where Luke had a significant reach advantage to start with. And, again, he's fighting from distance at first, and he's able to get his right hand in. Laprise throws really long-reaching right hands where he's off balance trying to counter and reaching in against somebody with a superior reach. That spells trouble when you do that because you make yourself completely vulnerable in the chance that you miss. And, aside from that, Luke, again, was stronger in the clinch, was able to dominate the clinch when they were there. He didn't get the takedown he was looking for, but he was in no jeopardy. There was really nothing being offered from Laprise there. And when they separated, Luke, again, jabs, lands a right hand, leg kicks. He's mixing it up. Laprise tries to reach in, tries to throw high kicks. and he doesn't gauge the distance before he does any of this. And because he's giving up that reach, Luke was able to land that big left hand, drop him, and just immediately ran in for the finish.
That's exactly what happened. I can't actually disagree with anything you put out there. Jeff, Luque is on a pretty good run, actually. His only 2 losses in the UFC were a decision to Michael Graves in his debut, and then he lost to Leon Edwards, who's on a non-trivial run of his own. He has finished all of his wins. Jeez. He has. He's got, I believe, 3...
He's underrated.
He's got 3 submissions and 3 TKOs.
He's an underrated workhorse, I think. And he looked really good last night. Laprice gave him a sweet opening, and he capitalized on it. And, move your head and keep, don't keep your head wide open, or someone's going to just... The gloves are so thin, even a short left can end your night. And that's exactly what Luke did last night. And he's definitely... I'm not like calling him a prospect or like a contender, but he's an underrated tough opponent for anyone.
And that was your main card. Again, it dragged into some pretty serious places, and everything after it, starting with and then through the Guido Canetti and Diego Rivas fight, and then through the main event, just... Oh, man. This whole event at that point just started dragging and dragging and dragging, and it was awful. But as for the prelims, Michel Prazeres defeated Zach Cummings via split decision. 2 29-28 for Prazeres, 1 29-28 for Cummings. Not a great fight, but man, Prazeres is...
That's 7 in a row for him.
Yeah, and he was forced back to welterweight for this fight because he had missed weight at lightweight in 3 of his previous 4 lightweight fights. But he was able to out-grapple a man significantly larger than him and Zach Cummings. Prazeres is not a guy to be trifled with. The best fight of the night, I thought, Alexandre Pantoja defeated Brandon Moreno via unanimous decision, 2-30-26 and 1-30-27. This was a good fight. Pantoja just had Moreno's number everywhere. He was throwing straighter punches. He was countering better. He was moving anytime Moreno tried to kind of loop at him. He'd get caught with a straight punch. Busted his nose up. Just a really, really solid outing from Pantoja. Probably his best performance in the UFC. Yeah, easily. He had the Eric Shelton fight, the series
This was
fight.
an Ultimate Fighter rematch.
Yeah, he beat Brandon Moreno on the season when we were fighting for the right to lose to Demetrius Johnson.
Yes.
Just a really good performance from Pantoja. At women's strawweight, Poliana Botello defeated Shuri Kondo via TKO with 33 seconds of the first round with a beautiful left body kick. Really hard liver kick. She set it up nicely. She kind of got half of a switch off, looking like she was trying to step out at an angle, and then was able to launch the left straight into the liver. Locked up Kondo because a really hard liver kick will do that to you. And finished her off with punches. Good stuff from her. Gabriel Benitez defeated Umberto Bandinai via knockout with a slam. Slammed his way out of an armbar, and the temple of Bandinai, he landed shoulder first, but I don't know if he didn't have his neck tight enough or if he just... he really should have just let go of the armbar, given the angle he was coming down at. If you're going to land on your shoulder blades and your back when someone's trying to slam out of an armbar, hold on to it because they're not actually going to get out of it. They're actually going to wind up driving their elbow deeper in between your hips. If you're landing at any kind of an angle, you probably want to bail on that to make sure this doesn't happen. He landed on his shoulder, and then his temple cracked, and it clearly wobbled him, and Benitez is a bit of a savage. As soon as he saw the opening, couple more punches. That was all she wrote. Good stuff from Benitez, who seems to be really kind of finding his stride. On Fight Pass, Enrique Barzola defeated Brandon Davis via unanimous decision, 30-27 and 30-26 twice. Nothing here. Davis couldn't deal with the wrestling of Barzola. Your life sucks against Barzola if you can't deal with his takedowns. And Davis isn't really UFC caliber anyway. Frankie Saenz defeated Henry Briones via unanimous decision, 30-27 twice, 30-26. Briones was just not able to ever get going, despite Frankie Saenz being predictable and wrestling heavy. But, good on Saenz for kind of bouncing back after his string of setbacks. And kicking everything off, Claudio Puelles scored a massive comeback. This was crazy. When he submitted Felipe Silva with a knee bar, Puelles was down both previous rounds. The second round he was down 10-8. He nearly got finished. He gets dropped again. His left eye is badly swelling. He's getting pounded on by Silva. And somehow in the midst... this fight could have been stopped. This is not an exaggeration. If they had stopped this fight like 3 seconds before Puelles rolled for that knee bar, no one would have complained, including Claudio Puelles. But Osiris Myra wanted blood, and because there was no blood, he didn't stop it. Puelles is able to roll under for a knee bar. The second time he rolled for this knee bar in the fight, the first time Silva read it and got his knee far enough out from between the legs to prevent it from being anything. Not so much this time. Couldn't get his leg free. Puelles locked it up, put the foot behind the armpit, arched into it. He scored the most statistically impressive comeback of certainly UFC history in this instance. He was at a 49-strike deficit and then hit that knee bar. Again, I think the fight could have and maybe should have even been stopped, but if the referee isn't stopping it and you've got even an ounce of wherewithal, he kept trying to win. And again, massive come-from-behind win there for Claudio Puelles. Deserves a lot of credit for that. So anyway, that is the set of prelims. Jeff, any burning desires coming out of that?
Frankie Saenz got a win. Good for him.
All right, Pat. Again, there were some pretty decent fights and certainly some interesting finishes on the prelims. What are your burning desires?
I'm a big Pantoja fan. I've liked him since The Ultimate Fighter. That's probably one of the better seasons we ever saw because of the talent level of a lot of the guys involved. And this was one of the most fun fights on that show when it happened. No surprise to me, it was a lot of fun this time, even if it wasn't overly competitive. Moreno always comes to fight. He never gives you less than the best he has to offer. And if you look at his history, he's lost to Sergio Pettis and Pantoja in the UFC. That's not bad at all. He's beaten Ortiz. He beat Benoit. He's a fun fighter, and when you match him up with certain guys, he may not win, but he'll push them. Pantoja's proven to be a very, very good fighter, and I like to see him move forward and try to get into that elite level of flyweight again.
Alrighty. Again, that was Fight Night 129. Thanks to those of you who followed along with my coverage. I needed all the help I could get for portions of this card, man. But you can find my full report in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com, so give that a read if you're so inclined. Leave a comment if you're also so inclined. Appreciate it. Alright, next Sunday. Again, a very early card for Sunday. We have the UFC's debut in Liverpool. Your main event. Man, this is not a terribly compelling card here. Anyway, the main event's good. Stephen Thompson takes on Darren Till. These are two top-ranked welterweights. Again, fighting on another foreign fight night. Boy, we're really tempting fate here, aren't we? I like this fight. I would rather have seen Till and Usman because I want to see Usman fight a really big, talented striker, and I want to see Darren Till fight a strong, dedicated wrestler. But this is the fight we got, and I'm not going to complain about it because I tend to enjoy the work both guys do. I really like Darren Till here, and there's a couple of specific reasons. One is his size. Darren Till is a big welterweight. There's a very real chance he winds up at middleweight in the near future. He's a large man for this division. The other is his style of fighting. Darren Till utilizes this really interesting hybrid of traditional karate and Muay Thai, which you don't necessarily think would blend all that well, but he's found a way to do it. He fights out of a karate-style stance. He's very bladed. He's very long with his stance. But he attacks with hard leg kicks if he's at distance. He doesn't throw Muay Thai-style combinations unless he's hurt you. But because of his karate background, his sniping at distance, as he kind of bounces in and out of range, similar to Stephen Thompson in this respect, actually, is incredibly dangerous and very powerful. If you look at what he did to Donald Cerrone, he was just bigger than Cerrone and was able to fight at the range he wanted to. But the way he kind of bounced in and out and was able to pick at him with long lefts. He did the same thing in the Bojan Veličković fight consistently. He did the same thing to Yesin Ayari in a lot of respects. It's a very difficult thing to kind of deal with. Machida made a career out of it. But when you combine some of that sensibility with his willingness to engage in clinch fighting, to throw knees from in close, to throw elbows from in close, he's really got this, I find it very forward-thinking hybrid of two styles that he's managed to blend quite well. Now, he does still have to deal with the striking and the kickboxing of Thompson, but because of his background, I think he's uniquely suited to do so. He's not going to be unfamiliar with how to deal with the long kicks of Thompson, the side kicks, whether that's to the body or head. He's not going to be befuddled by the movement. I really like Darren Till here. I like him to fight smart, but he's either going to time Thompson coming in, or he's going to put him in an awkward position kind of along the fence and clip him with something that Thompson doesn't see coming. I tend to think an elbow. And, I just really like Till here. I think the way he matches up with Thompson favors him rather heavily. Pat, I'll start with you for this one then. Am I off anywhere? How do you see this going? You've been critical of Thompson in the past generally, so how do you see this playing out?
This is a bad matchup for Stephen Thompson. If he can win it, I'll be very impressed by that. However, aside from the things you already pointed out about the good side of Darren Till in this particular matchup, there's other elements that he does that are going to cause Stephen Thompson a lot of problems. When Stephen Thompson controls distance on the outside with his kicks, he's not always kicking hard. He's throwing a lot of feinted kicks, a lot of half-hearted kicks, just to establish and measure distance for him to be able to load up with something eventually. Darren Till, as you pointed out, not only throws hard kicks, he will check any kick that comes at his legs as hard as he can. When you're not throwing a hard kick and you get checked hard, that hurts. It hurts a lot, and it discourages you from throwing kicks further. If you take kicks away from Stephen Thompson, you take away his primary offensive weapon and his primary means for defense, because he uses his legs for defense more than anything by moving and circling. So you have the chance to really take away the best parts of his game just with good defensive motion. That doesn't even account for Till throwing kicks at Thompson's legs, which will happen. Thompson's also been able to get away with guys who are unfamiliar with the straight line point fighting stance he takes at times. Till isn't. Till's seen it before. He knows how to fight against it. He knows how to use it. Also, Stephen Thompson still doesn't throw punches very well. Against guys who aren't good stand-up fighters, he's able to punch with them and throw better punches than they can. But against guys who are good stand-up fighters, he doesn't punch anywhere near as effectively as they do. And when you get to the inside, he gets lost with what to do with guys in there. If Till is able to get him on the inside, his Thai background and better punching, that's going to work Stephen Thompson over very badly. As odd as this sounds, Stephen Thompson's best bet may be to get this to the ground where he can use some of his jiu-jitsu under the Machados. I haven't seen much of Darren Till on the ground, so I don't know what his level of grappling is, and I haven't really seen him tested in that regard. But this is a very bad fight for Stephen Thompson on paper, and I'm really curious to see how this plays out.
All right, Jeff, we seem to be pretty hard on the Till corner here so far. How do you see this going?
Stephen Thompson is going to win this fight. I am not jumping on this Darren Till hype train. Robert, not long ago you were on the Stephen Thompson hype train, and you declared him to be a future UFC champion. Yep. And I think you're sour on him now because he failed to get the job done twice.
I picked him against Masvidal. I just don't like him in this fight.
He is going to win this fight. Darren Till has never faced this level of competition before.
True.
And Thompson is a better fighter than him. He's more well-rounded than him. He's better in the clinch than him. And he can do things that Darren Till cannot. And that is why I'm leaning toward Thompson here. And Stephen Thompson's going to win by decision.
All right.
Call it right now.
That's fair. I mean, I've been out on a limb as far as Thompson goes before. I went on a big limb and picked him to beat Johnny Hendricks. All right. Your co-main event went from being potentially interesting to deeply uninteresting. This was supposed to be Neil Magny and Gunnar Nelson, which is an interesting fight. Instead, Gunnar Nelson got injured because, I don't know, he's Gunnar Nelson? Who knows? Instead, Neil Magny is fighting late replacement Craig White, who is a cab driver. This is not a competitive fight. This is not even remotely interesting to me. Look, I soured on Neil Magny, and I think we've seen his ceiling at this point. I'm not sure how I would have felt about him and Nelson. He can certainly win that fight, but given that Magny is either all the way out or all the way in, and if he's all the way in, he wants to get, clinch takedowns and work from top position against a grappler the caliber of Nelson, I don't know how that would play out. Against an utterly unknown property like Craig White, Magny wins this basically walking away. Again, I think we've seen his ceiling, but it is well above the level of opposition being put in front of him here, provided he does not become stupid. If he doesn't become stupid between now and then, this is a relatively easy fight for Neil Magny to win. Jeff, I'll stick with you then. You've been on the Neil Magny bandwagon for a bit. I mean, the big question here is, does he get a finish, or does this go the distance?
Just give me a second.
Okay.
Had a headphone issue.
Oh, no problem.
He is going to destroy Craig White. Craig White will be lucky if there's anything left of his soul after this fight. Neil Magny all the way.
Pat, again, we've seen Magny's ceiling. Is there any reason to really believe we're going to see a major upset here?
No, and I actually would have taken Magny over Gunnar Nelson, too. I thought that was a good fight for Magny. He's going to come out with something to prove here, knowing that he went from a particularly good fight on paper for him against a named candidate versus a guy who's a virtual unknown. He's going to have his A game ready, especially fighting in England. He's going to be well prepared for this fight. He's going to come out guns blazing and look to be impressive, and he probably will be.
All right, next up we have Arnold Allen fighting Mads Burnell. Both these guys have actually been in the UFC for a bit. Allen is undefeated in the UFC. He's 3-0. This is about a roughly equivalent level of competition for him. He submitted somebody. He got a decision. Then he got a split decision over Makwan Amirkhani that actually should not have been split. He had that pretty cleanly, I thought. Allen's a good wrestler, good all-around grappler, and Burnell... Again, he's fought in the UFC before. I just, for the life of me, can't remember if he won or not. I know he's... And I know he's been there.
So Burnell is 1-1. He did beat Michel Prazeres.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, wait. He lost, excuse
No,
me.
not
He
Prazeres.
lost to...
He beat Santiago.
he lost...
It was Mike Santiago he beat. That's the one.
He lost to Prazeres by submission, and then he beat Mike Santiago. So he's 1-1.
I don't see much of a reason to pick against Arnold Allen here, who's he's not blowing the doors off of anybody just yet, but he's a really solid all-around fighter. Jeff, by all means, go ahead. What do you think about this one?
I like Arnold Allen here, especially after that win over Amirkhani. I expect it to be just a decisive win for him.
Pat, you going to take the cab driver here despite his 2 UFC fights over a guy who's actually on a pretty decent run?
No. I know next to nothing about either of these guys, so I'm just going to go with the odds and pick Arnold Allen for no good reason.
All right. Next up, we have a fight between Jason Knight and Makwan Amirkhani. Man, Jason Knight, that Ricardo Lamas loss, man, that really, really seemed to have done a number on him because he could not get going against Gabriel Benitez. I am not sure how to because Makwan Amirkhani he's not bad, but he's wild, and when his wildness doesn't work, he tries to rely on his takedown game. And I'm not sure how that'll play against Jason Knight. You know what? Screw it. I'll go with Amirkhani. I think the last couple of fights have just knocked something out of Knight's ability to fight. Happy to be proven wrong because, Hick Diaz over there is kind of fun to watch in some respects, but I think Amirkhani probably is able to out-wrestle him enough to get a decision, but I'm not necessarily looking forward to the fight. Pat, I'll go ahead and go with you for this one. I think you've seen both of these guys fight at least, so what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like 8-second Amirkhani. I just have never been impressed with Jason Knight. He had a lot of hype coming in, and I've never seen anything from him that would be indicative of a future champion or a top guy or a good contender. Amirkhani is not exactly a world beater either, but I've at least seen flashes of things that are impressive from him, like the aforementioned 8-second bludgeoning of Andy Ogle. And I will take a guy who can do that versus a guy who's never shown me anything.
All right, Jeff, you got some thoughts on this one or not?
Well, I mean, I think Knight does have a couple decent wins in the UFC. He finished Bruce Leroy and Chaz Skelly. I think those were decent victories, but I'm going with Amirkhani here, and I think Amirkhani is just going to dominate Knight, who I don't think was the same since that loss to Lamas. So I think he's going to go 0-3 here.
All right, we have Davey Grant fighting Manny Bermudez.
Ugh.
Boy, Davey Grant's been out for a while. Yeah, over a year, when he got armbarred by Damian Stasiak. I actually kind of like Manny Bermudez here. Bermudez is 12-0, and despite not having a Wikipedia page and being a bit of a cab driver, he had a really nice submission win over Albert Morales in his debut. That was actually earlier this year at the Emmett vs. Stevens card. I think Bermudez is a guy flying a little bit under the radar. So if you can find a betting line with him as an underdog, I would actually advise taking that. I really like him over Grant, especially with the layoff that Grant's got. And I mean, Grant's not exactly setting the world on fire anyway, but
He also can't defend submissions.
so it seems. Pat, I'll go ahead and stick with you for this to kind of get us going here. Then, do you like Bermudez despite him being the proverbial cab driver here?
Yeah, I do. I know this fight should probably be seen as a showcase potentially for the hometown or home country guy, but Davy Grant's got some serious holes in his grappling game where he was submitted very easily by Stasiak, and I think he lost one other fight by submission too recently, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was in the finals of some stupid tough season, and he got tapped in that.
Yes, it was the Misha Ronda season, if I remember right.
Yeah, Chris Holdsworth choked him out.
Yes,
tough 18, whatever that's worth.
And literally all Holdsworth can do is grapple, so he knew that was coming at him and still couldn't defend against it. So yeah, I like Bermudez.
All right, Jeff, you gonna buck the trend and pick the Englishman here?
Why is this fight on the main card?
Somewhat ironically, there's only one fight I think on the prelims that I might prefer be here over it. Because Dan Kelly's fighting Tom Breeze on the prelims. I mean, everything else...
I hope Manny Bermudez wins and stays undefeated. This fight does not belong on the main card, though. I'm sorry. Both these guys are Uber drivers.
All right, and kicking off the main card, we have Eric Spicely and Darren Stewart. Wow, this is a... All right, Eric Spicely's...
Why isn't Dan Kelly on the main card? That should be on the main card.
Again, that's the one fight that strikes me as out of place.
Or Nordine Taleb. I like Nordine Taleb more than these guys.
I have to double check what Taleb's last couple of fights have looked like.
He's good. He's good.
He's not the worst in the world. Eric Spicely lost his last two fights. He was submitted by Shoeface, Antonio Carlos Jr., and he was TKO'd by Gerald Mershart. That was a nice body kick, actually, if memory serves. And he's fighting Darren Stewart, who has yet to actually win in the UFC. His only pseudo-win in the UFC was overturned because he and Francimar Barroso clashed heads. Barroso smoked him in the rematch. He was submitted by Carl Robertson, and then he was submitted by Julian Marquez. This is do or die for Darren Stewart, and I think he's going to die. I like Spicely has a very good jiu-jitsu game when he gets to use it, and I don't think Stewart can stop him from using it. I think Spicely probably submits him here. But yeah, this is not, again, somewhat inauspicious. Jeff, well, this fight maybe shouldn't be on the main card. Who do you like here?
Yeah.
This is not a good matchup. I begrudgingly pick Eric Spicely.
All right, Pat, how do you see this going? Is Darren Stewart finally going to get a win that sticks in the UFC?
I'm going to say no. He's also been beaten. I don't think he's won a fight in like 2 years, right?
Something like that, yeah. Not in the UFC,
Yeah.
He hasn't won.
Yeah, I don't see it happening here. And that's not to say I think very highly of Eric Spicely. So don't take it that way. Because Eric Spicely I saw once get choked out by Sam Alvey. And while I love Sam Alvey, if he's choking you out to beat you, that's a problem. But at least he's won, so we'll go with him.
All right, on the prelims, we have Claudio Silva. Who is this guy? What's his nickname? Oh, this is Enrique de Silva. Okay. I think I know who this is. 2-0 in the UFC, beat Brad Scott and Leon Edwards. Assuming this is who I remember, Assuming I'm not confusing him with someone else. He's fighting Nordine Taleb. Taleb knocked out Danny Roberts. Oh, I know Taleb. Kind of goofy-looking guy, but that's not a bad fight. I'll go with Taleb. He's on a slightly better streak. The best fight outside of like the main event, Dan Kelly. Still in the UFC. 2-fight losing streak. He's fighting Tom Breeze. You guys remember when Tom Breeze was going to be a thing? Then he lost a split decision to Sean Strickland and hasn't fought since June of 2016.
Yeah, how did they dig him up for this one?
Screw it, I'm picking Kelly. It's sentimental on my
Well,
part.
he's from
but...
Birmingham, so he's got that.
What wasn't he scheduled, like he was scheduled at one point, and they just pulled him and they never gave a reason, like they just said he can't compete?
Yeah, he was supposed to fight Oluwale Bamboshe at Fight Night
Was
107.
deemed unfit to compete and the bout was canceled.
Yeah,
and that was about a year ago.
They never gave a specific reason.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't actually go into whether or not it was medical related, whether or not he just showed up drunk. I mean, just who knows? But I remember that they actually announced that, like the beginning of. They had to announce that like the beginning of that card, and those poor guys on commentary had to sit there and go, "Yeah, this is canceled because Tom Breeze was deemed unfit to compete," and they actually couldn't go into any more detail than that. I'll go with Dan Kelly. Why not? Brad Scott is getting about as close to a gimme as he's going to get. He was finished by Jack Hermanson in his last fight. He is taking on Carlo Pedersoli Jr. This is designed for Brad Scott to go brawl, get a win, make the crowd happy. We have a women's flyweight fight between Jillian Robertson and Molly McCann. I could swear I know at least one of those names.
I know a Molly McCann, but it's not this Molly McCann, so I will pick her.
That's fair enough. Debut for McCann. I think it's Robertson's debut. I could swear Oh, no, it's not. Robertson was on Tough 26. Okay, that's why I know her. She submitted Emily Whitmire at the finale. Okay, at least now I know where I know her name from. Yeah, I'll go with Robertson. Why not? I like pissing off the locals. And on Fight Pass, Elias Theodoru, who actually beat a guy on the televised portion of this, is stuck on the prelims. He is fighting Trevor Smith. That's actually kind of interesting. These guys both need to be the superior grappler in many respects. I've just never been impressed by Theodoru outside of his hair, which is quite glorious, all things considered. I'll go with Theodoru because Trevor Smith is just kind of hard-nosed, but he seems to stumble against a certain level of competition. And kicking everything off, we have Gina Mazzani, who I believe is after her first UFC win. Or did she get one? No, she got one. She beat a basic gimme against Yanan Wu after she got blown out by Sarah McMahon. She's fighting Lena Landsberg. I kind of like Landsberg here, actually. Mazzani is relatively pedestrian, and Landsberg is a level above that. Oh, geez, she got finished by Aspen Ladd, though. Ladd isn't the worst fighter in the world. Yeah, I'll go with Landsberg. Not terribly excited about that fight. Jeff, I'll start with you for this one. Do you have any burning desires for that group of prelims? Anything that strike your interest?
Dan Kelly, who should be on the main card and is not given the respect he's due. He's going to annihilate Tom Breeze. I like Elias Theodoro, and I hope he just shows something against Trevor Smith. Just because... Yeah.
I don't mean, Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Theodoro beat Dan Kelly in his last fight?
He did.
Yeah, he did. So
and he's on the prelim Fight Pass card, and Kelly's on the main card, and we get Jabronis on the main card on the actual show.
Yep.
Dan Kelly is an Olympic athlete and beat Rashad Evans, a former UFC champion. So he has a better career than Elias Theodorou does now. But I like Elias Theodorou, and I just feel he started off pretty hot. He went cold a little bit, so I hope he can kind of just keep the momentum going here and have a good performance against Trevor Smith. Those are the fights for me.
Pat, please give me something, anything.
I'm just really looking at this and scratching my head and can't figure out why not only Kelly versus Breeze, but Theodorou versus Smith is not higher up on the card than what it is. Theodorou really had a good performance against Dan Kelly, and I know Kelly's not an elite level talent, but again, he had some hits, and I was shocked that he couldn't do more after that win over Rashad Evans than what he did. Theodorou had a loss to Brad Tavares, but he's beaten guys we know. He's beaten Fahea. He's beaten Sam Alvey. There's untapped potential there that he needs to start realizing if he's really going to make a go of MMA. And he's 29, which isn't exactly old, but the clock is ticking for him to make that move and be something great. I think he's still training at TriStar, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, if memory serves.
Yeah. So while there, he really needs to supplement his grappling because his kickboxing is pretty good. But if he can just get that grappling base and continue the momentum he scored by beating Dan Kelly, I think there's potential for him to do something in a division that's not wide open, but all the top guys are starting to logjam, and they're going to need some new faces at a certain point.
All right. And again, that will be Sunday morning for UFC Fight Night 130, and I will have coverage on 411mania.com in the MMA zone. From first prelim until the main event. I'm going to have to wake up early. That could be a long one. I joked that there's no way this card will actually prevent us from doing the show on Sunday evening. Because it starts at, again, 10 a.m. Eastern. And we start at 8 p.m. Eastern. And then it occurred to me that, no, it would take a couple of major things to happen, but it is not outside the realm of possibility that this event goes, 10 hours. It would take some major delays, some broadcast issues, but crazier things have happened. So if that does actually go really, 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 really long, the show might be a bit late, but hopefully it will go as normal, and it will end, let's see, it starts 8 here. It'll end around 3-ish. Yeah, 3-ish. And we can just do the show normally, but if it's later than usual, that's why, everybody, because this event will just never end. I'm convinced that, my life is now just one long UFC event that I'm just not actually being told. All the time during the week, it's like, no, these fights are happening, you're just not being told about them, and you're not covering them, but it never actually ends. And then I'm intermittently blasted with something awful like Face the Pain just to cause me more anguish. Alright, on that quasi-existential note.
Yeah.
Jeff, were there any major news items that broke over the last week we want to touch on? Anything you feel should be brought up here?
There's a couple. Another fight for UFC 226 in July. A lightweight bout between Gilbert Burns and Dan Hooker.
I like that.
Fun fight.
I like
Fun
that a
fight.
lot.
Very, very good potential there for a fight of the night.
Action fight. Maybe not the higher level fight Dan Hooker wanted after knocking out Jim Miller, but I think this is a good fight to if he beats Burns, that's a solid win for him to move up and things like that. And it's a good fight for Gilbert Burns as well. So I like this fight. Let's see. Dennis Bermudez is fighting Rick Glenn at UFC Boise.
It's not bad.
Let's see. When is this is the July 14th Idaho card. So, let's see. What else do we have coming up in Idaho?
I mean, you get the main event is they confirmed that
Ivanov.
a few weeks ago. It's Dos Santos and Ivanov.
Honestly, this card is kind of shaping up pretty nice, honestly.
There's a few things on it that are pretty good.
Down the card is at least stronger. I think the undercard for this one is becoming stronger than this weekend's and next weekend's, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, you got Vic and Felder, you have Elkins and Volkanovski.
Miles Jury versus Chad Mendes is happening.
Yeah, Mendes is coming back.
Right.
Please, Boise, chant steroids at him. It will amuse me.
What weight is that happening at?
Featherweight.
That's featherweight.
Okay.
Let's see. The thing is, Bermudez
there's even a half-decent women's fight there with Kat Zingano and Marion Renault.
Bermudez, he was kind of up there a little bit, but now he's on a 3-fight losing streak, so this is a very important fight for him. And Glenn lost to Miles Jury last December, so important fight for both guys. John Dodson has re-upped for the UFC, so his free agency is over. So it looks like Dodson is staying in the UFC for now.
Yeah, good for him.
I am kind of surprised at that, though, because say what you will about Bellator, they are making bigger pushes and throwing out more money to just get people away from the UFC. I'm really shocked they didn't do it with Dodson, because Dodson is one of those guys they could have put on, and against their level of opposition, could have really.
Bellator's biggest problem right now is
they might have.
They barely
might
draw
have. The UFC might have
barely draw flies to like horse manure. Bellator's in pretty dire straits.
Right. Let's see. Oh, that's just a poster. I
think Ariel Helwani's kind of.
Here we go.
Go ahead.
I don't think we address. Did we address Alvarez versus Poirier too?
We did not.
A little bit, but yeah, no, that Calgary card is.
I assume this is our main event for Calgary, right?
Yeah.
This is the apology for what was it, UFC? What was it, 146, 149?
It was the first. I know the main event was the first fight between Barao and Faber, and that was actually a decent fight, but the event had been so bad it was booed out of the building.
Yeah.
No, that's got Alvarez and Poirier as your main event. You've got Aldo and Stevens, Joanna and Tisha Torres.
My only issue here is that Aldo versus Stevens won't be 5 rounds.
Yeah.
That's my only issue.
I do wish that was 5 rounds.
I mean, I'm happy Alvarez versus Poirier isn't a 5-round fight, and I mean, and that's a potential title eliminator, all things considered.
And that ain't going 5 rounds.
Probably not. But I mean, like, to me, Aldo versus Stevens is a fight that could potentially use that. So, this is looking like a good card, though.
Geez, Cajun Johnson and Islam Makhachev is going to fly under the radar, but that's a good fight. Kutalaba's fighting Antigulov, just because last names that make my fingers cramp, I suppose. Mateus Nicolau and Dustin Ortiz. Yeah, that's a really solid card. I mean, maybe the worst 2 fights on it that have been announced so far are like Jordan Main and Alex Morono, because Jordan Main, and then John McDessie and Ross Pearson is a battle of who's further over the hill. But even Alex Hernandez and Olivier Aubin-Mercier is interesting, because Hernandez scored that massive knockout of crap, I can't remember his name. Why am I blanking on this guy's name?
Anyway, I like Poirier for that rematch, honestly.
I liked him for the first one, and had he not gotten stupid and brawled with Alvarez, he would have had it clean.
Yes, he would have.
And then Alvarez decided he just wanted a shortcut out of there, so he landed that illegal knee. But, yeah, I mean, they've both had some really great fights. Their first fight was pretty darn good, so yeah, that's a really solid card. Apparently there's some discussions going on about the main event for the UFC's Russian debut.
That was the other thing. So the UFC is going to Russia.
Yeah, they're talking about Verdum and Olynyk for it, which is so bad.
I mean, come on.
Which is so stupid.
I mean, their first card. I mean, can't you put together a better card for their first card in Russia? like their first card. It wasn't their first card in Japan, right? But their first one in a long time. In what was it? 2012, Robert?
Oh, with Benson Henderson and Frankie.
Yeah, they put a good card. They put a good card together for that. Granted, it was a pay-per-view event, but like
they did. No, but you're right. They did at least put. They put at least 3 real good fights on the pay-per-view portion of it. They did the requisite local talent that's popular on the card. This is just like they don't care. Like, you couldn't get Khabib to fight on this card.
Not like, hang on. Khabib's not fighting on free TV. I mean,
no, but I'm just saying, Jeff's point still stands in that when they did the big rollout for the Japan event, they really made it a big deal. This should be a big deal, and they're treating it like they're doing their Chile card all over again.
Now, to be fair, that has not been confirmed, but that's apparently what they want to do. And, I mean, if I'm Olynyk, I take that just because there's no downside. Like, I mean, if you get beat by Fabricio Verdum, then, it is Fabricio Verdum. But on the off chance he catches Verdum in an Ezekiel choke, I can't even finish that sentence. Like, no. You're not going to Ezekiel choke Fabricio Verdum.
Well, I mean, I just hope they put some decent fights together for because I mean that could be a big market for them, honestly.
Figure out how to work the time difference.
But look how many Russian competitors you have in MMA as a whole. There are literally Russians in every promotion. So it's not like they're really not popular in MMA there. Sambo competitors transfer right over to MMA. Judo competitors do it. Russia is an MMA hotbed that's really somehow gone untapped.
Okay, and last thing, this comes from MMA Fighting. Nate Diaz is under investigation by the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department for an alleged role in a brawl at Combate Americas.
Yeah,
Diaz
he and Clay Guida got into it, apparently.
Oh, God, he should be given a
medal.
They fought.
I guess Diaz was still sore about that time. Guida basically laid and prayed on him for a win. He apparently shoved Guida in. Well, come on here. Diaz apparently shoved Guida into a guardrail, and Guida has accused Diaz of battery.
Oh, God,
so there
stop
you go.
it.
Oh, that's hilarious. This sport's nuts.
Like, come on. Like, really? You get shoved into a guardrail and made to look like an idiot, and you're a professional fighter, and your response is to sue for battery? Oh.
Well, he's not. Well, I mean, he's under investigation. He hasn't sued him yet. So I mean, we haven't even really heard about. Have any lawsuits been filed under against Conor McGregor?
No,
not yet. But
are we gonna? Is this like in 3 years? Are we gonna hear about lawsuits? Because sometimes it takes that long for a lawsuit to get filed. Sometimes.
Basically, he's gonna be in court next month to face multiple counts of
the criminal charges have to be addressed again next month.
Those are the federal. But what about civil trials?
That's probably when they'll be announced, is when he's back in the country.
And as long as he's under UFC contract, I don't think we're going to see a lot of civil charges brought up against him, to be fair. I think the UFC is going to want to keep that situation as clean as possible. Whether they have to make some payouts or what have you, they will.
I mean, I have to imagine the only thing that's really kind of stopped Ray Borg from going forward with filing suit is the fact that his kid needed brain surgery.
Yeah.
I mean, he's had a lot to deal with recently.
Well, just for example, didn't John Jones pay out, not like a settlement, but he basically paid off the pregnant woman he hit, right?
Yes,
I believe
so.
And that's why she didn't file a lawsuit against him.
Correct.
Yeah, which is, to be fair, before anyone starts screaming about that, that's perfectly legal.
And fairly commonplace.
It's legal bribery. Let's call it what it is.
Look, they were compensated outside of a legal proceedings, and they probably signed both a non-disclosure agreement and a I forget the legal terminology for an agreement not to sue on this particular.
It's called bribery. Let's just call it what it is.
No, because bribery. All of the things that go through in that are actually legal.
Bribery is...
Bribery by definition is not illegal, Robert.
Bribery is exercising influence in a situation where there is no previous call for it. Like bribery would be going into a
Bribery
situation.
is the act of giving or receiving something of value in exchange for some kind of influence or action in return that the recipient would otherwise not alter.
Right, but that's not making, say, paying for the damages of the car, an estimate of mental anguish and suffering, physical effects. That's not bribery. That's him covering his butt before getting further parties involved who may disagree with what the amount would be.
It kind of feels like bribery.
It's not bribery. It's more preemptive settling at the expediency rather than going through litigation.
Well, here's what I want to know: has Conor McGregor preemptively settled?
He might have.
With any of the aggrieved parties.
That's entirely possible.
But one, I don't think he still has the money to do it if that many people tried to get him. I think that would be money that comes from WME-IMG because he's still their top draw and their biggest star. And I think they, more so than him, would want to be preemptive about getting this thing over with as fast as possible and costing as little money, especially from their own fighters.
Yeah, it's entirely possible they had lawyers draw up, again, payments and non-disclosure agreements that anyone he may have injured or otherwise affected, that everyone was happy to just kind of, and considering that fighters can't actually even agree. Fighters are so weird when it comes to money. I mean, the UFC's about to wind up with $300+ million annually for their television fees, none of which will go to the fighters because they can't actually get along. So a quick agreement to accept a payment in exchange for not talking about anything pertaining to McGregor and the attack, as well as agreeing not to sue him, would not be out of character or run contrary to known patterns of behavior.
And last thing, no, I don't think. Antonina Shevchenko, she has a fight coming up, right?
She is going to be
Valentina's sister?
Yeah, she's going to be on the Tuesday Night Contender Series.
That's right. So that's coming up soon, isn't it?
Yeah, next couple of weeks. Next month, I believe it starts in June.
So this is the second season.
Yep.
They
have a pretty good cast, all things considered, set up for this season.
I mean, I don't know how good Shevchenko is, and if she has any. And,
if she's half as talented as her sister, she will probably be in the UFC.
Would this be the first time, if she wins, would this be the first time you have two sisters fighting on the roster? We've had brothers and such.
Assuming she is signed, yes. I do not believe we've ever had sisters.
A pair of sisters. And apparently she said she would fight in the same division as her sister.
I'm not familiar enough with the young.
But I don't want to make too many assumptions about how good she is. But there you go.
So if she winds up being a killer like her sister, though, and we get to the point where they're the two dominant females of the division, we could have a Klitschko situation where they won't fight each other and just deny us the whole time.
I would laugh. That would amuse me to no end.
I don't even know, but the thing is, I don't even know what her. Okay, she's 3-0 in MMA. So I don't really know how good of a fighter she really is, because this will be like.
Well, no, we're talking hypotheticals.
No, true. It's interesting to postulate, I guess. It's interesting to postulate.
Oh, two things pertaining to UFC 129 I wanted to give some shout outs to that I, as a just fan, happened to enjoy, or at least pay attention to. One is Victor Davila, who's a 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Eddie Bravo. He's the co-founder of the EBI. He's been around the jiu-jitsu scene for a long time. Doing the trilingual thing he was the guy who was doing the translation for fighters at UFC Fight Night 129, and there were a lot of Brazilians who won, so he actually had to go from the English question to Spanish for the audience to Portuguese for the fighter, and acquitted himself very well. So good on you, Victor. And apparently I've heard some decent things about Valentina Shevchenko, who was on the Fox Deportes analyst desk for that event, because
doing the Spanish broadcasting.
Because she's basically fluent in Spanish. She's lived in, I believe, Peru for a long time.
She probably knows Elvish and Klingon, too.
She speaks, I believe, Russian, English, and Spanish.
Put her on Rosetta Stone for a week, and she'll probably learn everything on there, including Ara Bosch from Star Wars.
Dude, that is such a ridiculously talented woman. I mean,
yeah.
Even if, again, her fighting she's a great fighter, but she's, a nearly competitive level dancer. She's competed on, dancing competitions on Peruvian television. She's a nearly competitive level shooter. Again, Muay Thai champion, should probably be an MMA champion. The amount of talent that she possesses is mind-boggling. So, good on her now, doing some analyst work. And again,
Montano,
I don't speak Spanish.
Take your loss like a woman. Woman up, Montano.
Yeah, that
Put some ice on the foot. Get in the cage. Lose your title like a tough woman should. Woman up.
Yeah, I do not think that would go well for Nico, even if it probably goes the distance, because...
No, I'm just saying what we're all thinking.
All right.
We want the UFC belt on Valentina because she deserves it. And we all love Valentina.
And again, I'm of the opinion she should have been bantamweight champion, but scoring being what scoring is.
Yep, I don't disagree with that either.
All right, on that note, if there's nothing else, Jeff, what would you like to plug going forward?
Tomorrow I'm going to be seeing Solo, a Star Wars story, so be on the lookout for that. I was invited by Marvel to do the junket for Cloak and Dagger, so I'm going to be doing that tomorrow, and then seeing Star Wars. E3 is coming up, so and my review of Deadpool 2, the #1 movie this weekend, so check out my review for those. Infinity War, interview with Gendy Tartakovsky, so lots of good stuff. Thank you, guys. Looking forward to the fallout of Stephen Thompson beating Darren Till. Bye-bye.
All right, Jeff. Pat, how about you? Anything you'd like to plug going on the next couple of weeks?
Certainly. This Thursday night, actually, myself, Mark Radulich, Jesse Starcher, and a couple other fellas are going to be doing a TV party dedicated to Cobra Kai, the hot YouTube Red series following the events of the Karate Kid movie franchise in present day, with what's happening with Johnny and Daniel, the resurrection of the Cobra Kai dojo, and the way of the fist. Strike hard, strike first, no mercy, sir. You'll hear all our thoughts on the series, what we think Season 2 may have to offer. So you can go ahead and listen for that on Thursday night. We'll be recording. It should be up and ready to listen to on Friday on the Radulich and Broadcasting Network and all our various means of sharing, such as YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes, etc., etc., etc.
All right. At what point do they jump the shark with that show?
I'm thinking Season 2.
So in Season 2, do we actually get the reveal that John Kreese is being died and came back to life because the Cobra Kai dojo returned to prominence? That is his life force.
I will reveal no spoilers. Not till Thursday's recording, anyway.
I haven't seen it. The Karate Kid bothered me as a kid because I was rather seriously into martial arts, and there were things about it that just kind of bugged me. I mean, I know why it's a cultural touchstone. I do. You
can't say the crane kick doesn't work. Lyoto Machida already proved it does.
Oh no, my issue is not with the efficacy of the crane kick. The crane kick does in fact work if you're fighting Vitor Belfort or Old Man Kotor. But I don't want to get into it. I'd be here for another hour talking about some of the issues.
I'll tell everybody who's listening and is curious and hasn't watched it yet. It's on YouTube Red, which, yes, YouTube Red is a paid service. However, you are also able to get a free week trial with it and can, in fact, watch the series if you've got some time to kill during a week. So I would recommend, if you are thinking about doing it but on the fence, use the free trial for YouTube Red, because there's also other content YouTube has that's exclusive, like movies, like other series that they're starting to produce. So it could be worth it just to try the free trial of it, even if it's not for Cobra Kai.
All right, and I will probably be listening to that. Speaking of Mark and reviewing things, I have to suffer. This Tuesday, Mark Radulich and I will be reviewing Deadpool 2. For those of you who don't know, I did not care for the first Deadpool. You can find our review where Mark and I talk about it, and he basically yells at me for having a different sense of humor. So we'll be reviewing the second one. I had very few structural complaints with Deadpool, the first one. I had a couple, but nothing terribly major. I apparently hear that the structure in 2 actually suffers more than the structure in 1, so I'll be looking at that. And, I mean, involving time travel is always a terrible decision, unless you're really going to do it. And then Mark and I will, again, provide a full review. I may be wrong. I haven't seen it yet, so I might wind up really enjoying it. I don't anticipate it, but crazier things have happened. So you can listen to Mark and I review that. You can enjoy my suffering, in all likelihood, because I just don't like I don't like Deadpool as a character, and I realized why. It's because Deadpool is like the physical embodiment of the internet. And while the internet provides for some great things, such as your ability to listen to this show, there's so much about it that I hate.
And I point to cable as everything I hate about comics.
Also true. You and cable have a long and sad history.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, it's also perfectly fair to argue that comics in general have long, sad stretches of their history. And some great ones, too. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like comics are terrible. But let's also not pretend that everything was sunshine, everything was great. Because there's at least 3 Spider-Man arcs I could name that would make people that just... I bring them up and people immediately, like, throw things at me. The context doesn't even matter. So anyway, I'll be reviewing that, and we'll see how that goes. We'll be back here next week, again, Sunday evening. I believe I have suffered an injunction from on high that these now have to be recorded instead of live because of how easy it is to then publish to various outlets, rather than do it live and then try to do things manually, especially getting things onto YouTube because Mark is weird about that. And I can't actually access Mark's YouTube channel outside of the Spreaker studio, so... if you do have questions or comments that you would like me to address on air, feel free to tweet me. I'm at WinfreyMMA. You can... I don't want to... I actually can't give out my email address at the moment because reasons. It was Yahoo, and Yahoo's security breach is potentially cocking things up, so I'm working on moving some of my stuff over to a different service. It's a whole thing. I don't want to bore you guys. But I'm happy to take questions to address issues if you have topics you want specifically brought up. I'm more than happy to do so. Just get the information to me. I'm perfectly willing to kill airtime doing it. With that out of the way, that's everything we have. We'll be back next week. Until then, for Pat and Jeff, I'm Robert. Thank you also very much for listening. Until next time, continue to be well, be safe, and behave.